The Panther G, officially designated the Panzerkampfwagen 5 Ausführung G and listed as the Sonderkraftfahrzeug 171, was one of the most notable German tanks of the Second World War. Weighing about 45 tons, it already exceeded the weight the designers originally intended. The main reason was the reinforced frontal armor, which was meant to fix the weakness of the earlier Panther variants. The result was a tank with impressive protection values, but also a machine that pushed its engine, transmission and suspension close to their structural limits. Another detail is that the late production Panther G tanks no longer received Simerit coating. This wasn't because Simerit was considered useless, but because it slowed production, and by 1944 the threat of magnetic mines was nearly irrelevant. The hull armor of the Panther G was one of the strongest qualities, at least from the front. The upper glacis plate had 80 mm of armor sloped at 55 degrees, giving it roughly 120 mm of effective thickness. The lower glacis was 50 mm thick and angled at 56 degrees, about 100 mm effective armor. The side armor, however, was noticeably weaker, at 50 mm angled at only 24 degrees. It provided limited protection against heavy Soviet or Allied guns, especially during flanking engagements. The rear was even thinner, at 40 mm, with a 30-degree angle. The whole roof was very thin, at 17 mm, something shared by almost all tanks of the era. The turret armor was a mix of strengths and weaknesses. The turret front had 110 mm, plus the large, roughly 100 mm thick mantlet. The sides and the rear of the turret, however, were reduced to 45 mm. The commander's cupola was heavily protected with 110 mm of armor. The main gun of the Panther G was the 7.5 cm Kampfwagenkanone 42, one of the most effective 75 mm tank guns of the war, firing the Panzergranate 3942 armor-piercing cap ballistic cap round. It reached a muzzle velocity of about 935 meters per second and could penetrate around 150 mm of armor at 500 meters. Against soft targets, the tank carried the Sprenggranate 42 high explosive round. The Panther also mounted 3 MG-34 machine guns, one coaxial in the turret, one in the full front, and an optional third one mounted on the commander cupola. Smoke launchers were fitted as standard. However, the smoke launcher was just a grenade launcher on the turret. At full engine RPM, the turret rotation speed reached about 24 degrees per second, faster than many Allied turrets at the time. The Panther G was powered by the Maybach HL230P30, a 23.1 liter V12 gasoline engine producing just over 600 horsepower. On paper this sounded solid, but in practice the engine was barely adequate for a 45-ton vehicle. It was prone to overheating, especially at low speeds or in rough terrain, and generally felt underpowered for the mass it had to move. Turret reverse was powered by a Siemens LGP 724 generator. The transmission, the Zahnradfabrik AK7200, was designed for the vehicles weighing around 30 to 35 tons, not 45. That meant the Panther's gearbox required careful handling. If the driver shifted too aggressively or without precision, the transmission could be damaged, and this happened more frequently in the field than the designers would have liked, especially because in the later stages of the war the crews weren't really trained that much. The top speed was around 46 km an hour on roads, but in terrain it dropped significantly. The Panther used an interleaved and overlapping road wheel system. Complicated, heavy, but effective. In theory, it provided very smooth suspension and excellent cross-country mobility. In practice, maintenance was difficult. Mud, snow and ice could pack between the wheels and freeze solid. Replacing a single damaged wheel often required removing the others at first. The system worked, but it was far from ideal for quick repairs under combat condition.